He's going to use suffering to sift out all the jealousy, all of the hate, all of the pride, all of the envy, all of the untrust for him. So when he comes back for his people, he can look at us and he can judge us good.
What is up, everyone? We are back with another episode of Shaping the Culture. Now, let's just get to it. The whole secular sacred divide. There is no distinction in the scriptures. Some of us have trust issues with God, and some of us, it's like, does God really got us? You can't engage the culture with the gospel that first has not engaged you. Like, you know how people are like, oh, that's just who I am. Nah.
Keep. Drop the mic. Drop the mic.
Shaping the code.
Oh, the therapist got a question. This finna be deep.
Well, I don't know about all that, but my question, I feel like a lot of my work, and I say this kind of with my peers or with my friends a lot, but I feel like a lot of my work centers around helping people heal from poor theology just as much as I do trauma.
Wow.
And one of the most, the staple one is this idea, and I'd like to know your thoughts. This idea that God requires suffering of us, as opposed to, so my thought process around this has been that because we live in a fallen world, God allows suffering. And it's just part of where we are and what we live in. However, a lot of people, especially I wouldn't even necessarily call it doctrine, but a lot of preaching and things like that centers around how God almost needs us to suffer in order for us to experience more of him or to have deeper relationship, etc. And because we know that all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord are called according to his purposes, we know that he can use traumatic situations, he can use suffering, he can use those things, and it ends up bringing us closer to him. But do you believe or know that suffering is a requirement as opposed to a consequence for the world that we live in? Does that make sense?
I think it's both. I think God calls us to suffer. I honestly do, but I also think it's a result of the fallen world. I'll read this real quick. This is 1 Peter 4, starting at the 12th verse, and I love this passage so much. This is Peter talking, and the first word he says is beloved. And so he's speaking to people who are beloved by God. So he's not talking to unbelievers. He's not talking to people who are enemies of God. He's talking to Christians. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes to test you. Now, listen to this. The fiery trial is referring to the 400-year burning of Rome, where Christians were burnt alive and thrown off cliffs. And so contextually, they knew what he was talking about. Think about that. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you. And so we see that suffering is a test. All right? As though something was strange happening to you. So he's saying, don't even think that it's strange, but rejoice insofar as you share in Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. Let none of us suffer as a murderer or a thief or evildoer or a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name, right? And so what we see there is Peter saying, beloved, right? Don't be surprised when suffering comes, when trials comes, because literally it is a test. I think God is going to allow suffering to happen to test the people of God, to test if you're with them. Look at what he did with Job. Satan approaches Job, right? And literally, he can't lie to God. So he was like, I'm looking around, seeing who I can destroy. And he says, have you tried my servant Job? He offered Job, right? The most faithful man in all of the East. Then what does he say? Okay, Satan hating on him. He only faithful because you haven't made anything hard for him. God literally gives him permission to touch him, but not to touch his life. kills the man 12 kids, kills all of his cattle, all of his money. His wife tells him to curse God and die. His homeboys come and say, man, you must have sinned against God. And he was like, no, I didn't sin against God, right? And so like he had boils all over his body. God allowed Satan to touch his life to test him, right? And so I do think that if God, the Father, sent his Son into the world to intentionally suffer, what makes us think that we won't go through the same suffering, right? And so I think our suffering looks different, but I honestly believe that we sell people short when we don't give them a right theology of suffering, because God is saying that I'm with you through your suffering, right? And so it's so many other scriptures that I can talk about, but I do think that God allows suffering, one, to test us, but also to prune us. I'll say this, and this is the last thing that I'll say. I love at the end of I didn't mean this to be a Bible study. I'm sorry, y'all.
It's good. It's good.
This whole passage about Christian suffering is saying don't suffer like this, don't suffer like that, don't suffer like this, right? And the first time I studied this passage, I was confused at verse 17, because at verse 17 it seems like Peter is making a switch. It says for it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God, and if it begins with us, what will be the outcome of those who do not obey the gospel of God? The reason why I was confused when I first studied this passage was because it seemed like Peter was talking about suffering the whole time, and now he's talking about judgment. It seemed like a hard switch. And so I started doing like some deep studying, right? And no, but he's still talking about suffering here, right? Follow me. It says, for it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God. And if it begins with us, Christians, what will be the outcome of those who do not obey the gospel of God? Basically what he's saying is God is going to judge the whole world by way of suffering, right? But he's not going to judge he's not going to judge the church the same way he judges the world, right? Follow me. The best way I can explain this is think about a purification system, right? When water is taken out of a purification, out of its natural habitat and put into a purification system, that purification system sifts out all of the grime, all of the dirt, all of the minerals that's not good for human consumption, right? So when we go to the store, we can pick up a bottle of water, we can look at it and judge it good, right? That is what God is doing by using suffering for his church. He's going to use suffering to sift out all the jealousy, all of the hate, all of the pride, all of the envy, all of the untrust for him. So when he comes back for his people, he can look at us and he can judge us good, right? But and so this is the reason why he says, I'm gonna use suffering to judge my church first, so I can judge you righteous, so I can judge you good. But listen what it says. It says at the end, it says, and if it begins with us, what will be the outcome of those who do not obey the gospel of God? He's saying for the rest of the world, there's nothing left for them but the righteous wrath of God. We should be glad that God allows us to suffer. We should be glad that God allows us to be like him in that way. Because if we don't be like him in that way, we can never know him.
Yeah, it's good.
And so this is what God does when he uses suffering. So don't despise suffering, because you can never be like the one who came to this world to suffer to die for you.